He's the soft-spoken genius behind Dire Straits, the man whose guitar tells stories better than words ever could. But before he became a music icon, Mark Knopfler lived a life shaped by quiet homes, close-knit family moments, and rooms where the first chords of greatness were born. Let's step inside. Before the stadium tours and multi-platinum albums, before Sultans of Swing became a classic, Mark Knopfler was just a kid growing up in modest post-war Britain. Born on August 12, 1949 in Glasgow, Scotland, his childhood was shaped as much by family as it was by the cities he called home. His early years in Glasgow were spent in a standard red brick tenement building, not grand, not fancy, but full of the kind of everyday character that would later feed into his storytelling. At age 7, Knopfler's family moved south to Newcastle upon Tyne, settling in Gosforth, a suburban town known for its parks, its quiet streets, and its strong sense of community. The house they moved into was typical for the area, semi-detached, modest in size, with a small garden in the back and just enough space for a growing family. It was in that home, surrounded by books, radio shows, and the hum of working-class life, that Mark's creative spark began to take shape. One of the most formative moments in that house came when Mark's uncle, Kingsley, a boogie-woogie piano player, would visit and fill the living room with music. The energy was contagious. Mark was instantly drawn to the rhythm and feeling that poured from the keys, and it wasn't long before he wanted to create something of his own. At the age of 15, he got his hands on a Hofner super solid guitar, a gift that would soon become a lifelong extension of himself. That guitar, more than any other textbook or school lesson, shaped the rest of his life. The bedroom he shared with his brother doubled as a practice room. It wasn't soundproof, and the neighbors probably heard every pluck and stumble, but Mark played away, day after day, refining his finger-picking style and learning to let the guitar do the talking. That Gosforth house might not be the kind of place you'd expect a rock star to come from, but it was where Mark Knopfler found his sound. And more than that, it was where he found his voice, quiet, thoughtful, and deeply melodic. By the time he moved out for university and later relocated to London, Mark carried out with him the groundedness of his upbringing. The walls of that house may have faded into memory, but the lessons, the discipline, and the pure love of music that grew within them stuck with him. When Mark Knopfler made the move to London in the mid-1970s, he was just another young man with a guitar slung over his shoulder and big dreams buzzing in his head. He'd already studied journalism in Leeds and worked as a reporter, but music was calling louder than ever. London, gritty and bursting with creative energy, was the place where he'd finally step into the life he'd always imagined. And it all began in a cramped flat in Deptford, a small, unassuming apartment that would soon become the birthplace of Dire Straits. That Deptford flat was no rock star pad. It was a basic setup, low ceilings, worn carpeting, and barely enough room for two people to move around without bumping guitars. Mark shared the space with his younger brother, David, and bassist John Ilsley. Money was tight, so the flat doubled as a rehearsal space. The guys would huddle in the living room, navigating around coffee tables and laundry baskets to plug in amps and practice. They didn't have a proper studio, just passion and a small reel-to-reel recorder they'd use to track rough demos. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in chemistry. Something clicked in that flat, the kind of lightning in a bottle energy that happens once in a generation. Mark's unique finger-picking guitar style, David's rhythm, Ilsley's deep melodic bass, and later, Pick Withers' solid drumming all came together in those tight quarters. It was there, among stacks of music magazines and takeaway containers, that the first version of Sultans of Swing was recorded, a raw, haunting song that would become their breakout hit. The energy of the Deptford neighborhood seeped into their music. It was urban, real, and honest. Dire Straits wasn't about flash or trends. They were about storytelling, groove, and authenticity. That authenticity came from places like the flat they shared. Mark has spoken in interviews about the importance of environment when creating music, and there's no doubt that the hum of the London streets, the clatter of the nearby trains, and the grey, unglamorous surroundings of Deptford shaped the band's early tone. After Sultans of Swing began getting airplay, everything moved quickly. The band signed to Phonogram Records and released their self-titled debut album in 1978. Suddenly, Knopfler found himself on tour across Europe and the US, performing in venues much larger than his little living room in Deptford. But even as the stages got bigger, Mark remained incredibly grounded. While his peers were renting penthouses and splurging on limos, he stayed focused on the music, often retreating back to quieter parts of London between tours to rest, write, and reset. In the early 80s, Knopfler upgraded from the shared flat to a more private residence, still within London. This home located near Chelsea offered more space and privacy, a necessity as the demands of fame grew. Here, he started to build his first home studio. It wasn't lavish, but it allowed him to create without interruption. Whether he was working on Dire Straits albums or exploring new ideas that would later become solo material, this home became his creative haven. During this time, Dire Straits reached unbelievable heights. Albums like Making Movies and Love Over Gold confirmed the band's musical evolution. And then came Brothers in Arms, a record that sold over 30 million copies and made them global superstars. The irony? Despite all the success, Knopfler remained more comfortable in small spaces with his guitar than at award shows or red carpet events. The bigger the spotlight got, the more he leaned into the sanctuary of home. This part of Mark's life also reflected his desire for control and clarity in his sound. At home in his own studio, he could tweak every note until it felt just right. He wasn't interested in flashy production. He wanted warmth, honesty, and soul, and that's exactly what he built into his home workspace. Friends and collaborators would often visit, sharing quiet sessions over coffee instead of wild parties. It wasn't glamorous, but it was deeply personal and very Mark Knopfler. By the late 80s, as Dire Straits wrapped up their final tours and Knopfler leaned further into solo work and film scoring, he began craving more distance from the city. That shift would lead him to his next chapter, a country retreat in the south of England, far from the buzz of London. But those London years, especially the ones in Deptford, were where the magic began. The walls of that first flat might have been thin, but they held the earliest echoes of songs that would last a lifetime. As the 90s rolled in and the world of rock continued to shift, Mark Knopfler quietly stepped out of the spotlight. After years of worldwide touring, commercial highs with Dire Straits, and an exhausting pace that never seemed to let up, he made a choice many rock stars don't. He didn't chase more fame, he chased peace. That pursuit led him to the countryside of southern England, to a quiet home near the New Forest, where the noise of the world could finally settle down. The house itself wasn't some flashy celebrity mansion. It was private, elegant, and very Mark. Classic on the outside, understated on the inside, with rooms that felt lived in, not staged. Nestled among trees and fields, it was a world away from the chaos of Wembley Stadium or New York radio tours. And that's exactly what he wanted. He'd spent years in vans, hotels, green rooms, and airports. Now he needed stillness. The kind of stillness you can only get from birdsong in the morning, soft fog in the distance, and long afternoons alone with your guitar. Here, in this countryside retreat, Mark built the studio on his own terms. No distractions, no ticking clocks, just music whenever it came. And it did come. During these years, he leaned deeper into solo work and soundtracks. He composed music for films like Local Hero, Cal, and The Princess Bride. And even though these soundtracks felt miles apart from Dire Straits' stadium sound, they were no less powerful. In fact, they might have even been more personal. These were stories told not through words, but through textures, moods, and melodies. It was music that breathed, and his home became the space where that breath could happen naturally. Knopfler's love for folk, Celtic influences, and even country music started showing more clearly in his solo albums. You can hear it in the tone of Golden Heart and Sailing to Philadelphia. These weren't chart-chasing records. They were deeply rooted explorations of storytelling and atmosphere, inspired by long walks, old books, and the kind of reflection only solitude allows. All of it, every riff, every lyric, every quietly brilliant line, flowed from a man who had finally given himself permission to slow down. His home near Beaulieu in Hampshire, close to the sea and surrounded by historical villages, felt like an extension of who he was becoming, a man less interested in noise and more focused on craft. Locals often mention how grounded he seemed, stopping for coffee or chatting at the market, rarely drawing attention to himself. His fame never overshadowed his humility. The house itself, tucked behind hedgerows and stone walls, wasn't publicly flaunted. No reality TV tours, no photo spreads. But those lucky enough to have stepped inside describe a space filled with instruments, vintage amplifiers, well-worn leather chairs, and a fireplace always ready for a quiet evening. His study is reportedly lined with books on music, poetry, and history. The studio room, while modest in size, holds an impressive collection of guitars, each with its own story, its own voice. This retreat wasn't just about physical space. It represented a deeper shift in Knopfler's philosophy. Fame was never the goal, music was. And now, without the pressure of charts or the glare of critics, he could create the kind of work that came straight from the soul. That authenticity resonated deeply with fans, who continued to follow him album after album. Whether he was writing about historical figures, aging, or the strange tenderness of everyday life, there was always that signature honesty in his voice, and it was coming from a place of genuine comfort. Even in this quieter chapter, Mark Knopfler never stopped evolving. Collaborations with artists like Emmylou Harris, tours with smaller ensembles, and an ever-growing list of film projects all pointed to an artist more inspired than ever. Just working in a different gear. He wasn't chasing the past or trying to repeat Brothers in Arms. He was writing new chapters, often from the comfort of that countryside writing room, with a view of swaying trees and soft English light. And while Knopfler occasionally returned to the stage, his performances carried a different energy. They weren't about spectacle, they were about presence, about playing each note like it mattered, about sharing stories, not selling hits. The man who once headlined stadiums now played seated, surrounded by his bandmates, quietly commanding the room with nothing but a Stratocaster and that signature calm. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.